Welcome back, everyone, to Contracting Business Basics. Today, we're going to be doing learning module number 10, construction versus service. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to turn it over to our instructor, Hank Brancasio. Hank, welcome back.
Thanks, Lori. Glad to be back. As we progress through all of our learning modules, we've covered account management and building a financial roadmap and SWOT analysis. Those first three are kind of the roadmap for your business, planning your business. And we talked about critical or key external partners, your banker, your attorney, accounting, insurance, bonding. We talked about key suppliers. Now we get into some other little different stuff. And so now we're going to talk about construction versus service. And I don't know what each of the folks watching this, if you're starting a construction business, if you're buying a construction business or a service business, if you do both. But we're going to talk a little bit about construction versus service out as it's defined and some of the pluses and minuses for doing that. So some objectives. First is to identify the difference of construction and service business. Now that seems like a simple thing, but you'd be surprised how many people, I got this small construction job, I'll run it through my service business. Some reasons for not doing that. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do we define those two, be able to identify additional costs for operating a service business, because there are some additional costs that you don't have if you're just doing construction projects. We're talking about a term known as linkage, and that's about how do we link a construction job to our service business, and we'll get into that a little bit. And then finally, understanding how construction and service business can complement each other. Before I get into these, let me tell you, I sat on a peer group with contractors from all over the country. There must have been, 6 or 8 of us. And I was involved with a mechanical business that the service business was a big part of our business. And there was a lot of reasons for that we had that. But I met contractors in other parts of the country that did no service work. They purely did construction jobs. And they were all big projects. They had no service business. And so it's not like everybody has a service business, but I would tell you that we're going to go through some pluses and minuses, mostly pluses for having that service business, but also looking at some little nuances of that business. So let's compare the two. Let's start off simple. Construction, large projects lasting many months or years. Now, it could be a small project, again, could last many months, but typically it's a larger project. Service are smaller projects, usually that can be started, completed, and billed in 30 days. If you think of it that way, it's a little bit better to understand it. It is rare that you can do a construction project. You can start it, you can build it, you can bill it in 30 days. That's not that common. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's not that common. Typically, construction is new square footage. So that's easy to understand. Oh, they're adding an addition, they're building a new building, whereas service, it's existing building. Building systems upgrade or retrofit. So we're upgrading the plumbing system. We're putting in a new bathroom. We're upgrading piping. Whereas service is repairing something. So if we look at plumbing, this would be an easy one to understand. There's a new addition going on in a school. It includes a bathroom or a restroom, set of restrooms. So we're upgrading the restrooms. Whereas it's a school building and I need to go in and make some repairs to the bathrooms, whatever those repairs might be. Straightforward stuff. Contract on the construction side could be with an owner, could be with a GC, or could be with a developer, typically. More than likely on a service side, you're working directly for an owner. You're not working for somebody else. It's unusual. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's unusual. And then finally, service tends to be higher margins. Why is it higher margin? Well, you think of it this way. If I'm selling a construction job and I'm selling 10,000 hours of labor, this is an easy way to understand it, I can charge X amount of dollars an hour and make money on that because I got all these hours. Service, it might be I'm selling 8 hours of my best plumber to go do service work. I gotta make a fair amount of money because I'm burning him up for 8 hours. So it tends to be a little higher margins. Now, here's another example. In my previous life, I did a fair amount, worked and got paid before college, during college, and after college as a cabinet maker. And we had a cabinet shop, and we would cut wood for people. And people would just come in off the street and they'd say, "Oh, I got this piece of plywood I want to cut." And I'd say, "Okay, well, flat charge, $35. Oh, okay. I would set the saw up and make the cut. It would take me 5 minutes. And they'd be like, "Wow, $35? You only did it for 5 minutes." I'm like, "Look, I got to stop what I'm doing. I got to make a cut, change the machine, put the machine back to where it was. You saw me do something for 5 minutes. I've got to make X amount of dollars on that to make it worth my while. It's not like I'm selling 10,000 hours." So you tend to have higher margins on your service. You also tend to have higher costs on your service work. So that's something to keep in mind. But that's a kind of a general rule of thumb of comparing construction to service work. So additional costs. What are these additional costs? You said there's more costs. So service technician, service vehicle tools, equipment and parts. You might have a truck fitted with $10,000 to $15,000 of equipment, parts, tools, etc. in that vehicle that you don't have if you're sending somebody out to do a construction job. So that's first thing, a lot more inventory, a lot more tools on there. You might need a dispatcher. You might have somebody working in your office that's taking calls from customers and dispatching your service guys out to the project. Now, if it's only one person, you may not need a dispatcher, but the business I was involved with, we had 25 trucks on the road. Well, that's not going to get done with the service manager because he's got his own problems to deal with. The next one on the list is service manager. Usually you get big enough, you need somebody who wakes up every day and the only thing they think about is service. I will tell you, you can try to do this with a project manager who doesn't understand service, and he will approach it like he's doing a construction job, which is a mistake. You want somebody that understands service, understands the problems customers are calling in about, and can solve some issues that come up with it. You need an answering service. You get involved with service, you need an answering service system. Now, again, if you're starting a business and it's you and you alone, you got your cell phone, and if you're willing to take phone calls at 2:00 in the morning, fine. But as you grow, you're going to need an outside answering service that can take calls 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And most customers, when you say, "Well, I have a service business," they'll be like, "Okay, what happens if I call on a Sunday afternoon at 3:00 in the afternoon? Who's answering the phone? Can I still get somebody?" Having a good answering service is important. Specialty tools or additional tools. If you're doing HVAC systems, pressure washers for cleaning, condensing units, refrigerant recovery machines, refrigerant that you need, plumbing, drain cleaning machine. Now, you can rent some of this stuff, but the bigger you get and the more service work you do, there's more stuff you need in there. Inventory of parts. Maybe you need some basic parts so that you go out to a job site, you can get through that and get the problem solved. And then finally, service ticket entry tracking software. There's a fair amount of money sitting here on this screen. You know, a service manager, if you're big enough, maybe that's going to cost you $150,000 a year. Oh, I got a dispatcher. Maybe that costs you $60,000. I mean, there's a fair amount of money sitting on this screen. So service business has additional costs. That's where these labor rates come from. I know what people think sometimes. I don't understand this. You know, I got a union agreement and I'm making $40 an hour plus benefits. I mean, we talked about this on a previous video. I don't understand why they're charging $150 an hour. Well, there's a lot of cost involved with service. And so somehow the mechanical contractor, your business, has to recover that cost and still make money on it. It's, you know, again, you're not in the nonprofit business. It's not a dirty word.
So Hank, given all the additional costs and logistics involved in running a service business, why would someone consider adding a service department to their construction business?
Well, that's a great lead in to this slide.
Huh, I'm so good at that.
And the future slide. So why would you have a service business? Service linkage. We're going to talk about this. How do I link a construction job? So let's say I'm doing construction work, and I'm going to base this example around, I did a new HVAC system in a building. And so how do I connect service? How do I get service in there? Oh, I did this construction job. I don't really have any service. How do I do? Okay. So service linkage, simple definition, the ability to connect with a customer where you completed an installation project and sell them ongoing service on new equipment or systems. If you've put in a new HVAC system in a building, so let's say you've got pumps, you've got air handling units, maybe you've got new water heating systems. How do I link those two? So a couple of things. No one knows the building better than you do. So that's number one on the hit parade. No one knows the equipment better. You put it in. Your competitor didn't put it in. So that's important to understand. How do I make that linkage? An effective way to stay in front of your customer. Okay, if I install a new HVAC system, if I install a new plumbing system in a building and I walk away, I guarantee you, more than likely somebody, one of your competitors, is going to go do service on there. Or at some point, the building owner is going to need maintenance done or service done. Would you rather have them call you or call your competitor? And so it is an effective way to stay right in front of the customer when repairs and maintenance. This is not residential where you can build a brand new house and not have much done for years. If this is a complicated, sophisticated commercial project, things need to get done. Things break for all practical purposes, and they need to be maintained. And that's a great way to stay in front of the customer. So again, we're getting to this whole, why do we want service? The simplest and easy way to sell a comprehensive service agreement in a non-competitive situation. Now, listen, if you've been in a business any length of time, at some point, you're going to be bidding on service work. But here's an opportunity to go get more work in a non-competitive situation, stay in front of the customer. So you build a building, you now do some service work. Okay, it costs you some money to do that. But now 3 years later, the customer wants to expand that building or build another building. You want them to think of you first for their mechanical work, not like you're just another run-of-the-mill contractor out there. So that's another really good reason to do service work. We're going to talk about some more things. How do they complement one another? Well, small service projects in a building can lead to larger construction projects. So let's say you're really having a hard time getting into an account. You're having a hard time trying to get in there because you're competing with these bigger contractors. You're starting off, or you're a small business. You just bought a small contracting business. Consequently, hard to get in there on a big job, but maybe you can get in there with small work. Maybe you can start to do some small service work. Get to know the maintenance staff, get to know the building, get to understand what's going on. Now, when they go to build a new building or they go to put an addition on, all of a sudden you're front and center because the maintenance people like, hey, I really like Acme Mechanical. These guys are really good. Their men are really good. They're conscientious. I want them bidding on this job, or I want them involved with this project. So that's one great reason to have a service business, because sometimes it's harder to get into a building on one big job. It might be easier to start off on small projects, and 3 years down the road, next thing you know, you're bidding on a larger project. Large construction projects can lead to linkage opportunities, previous slide. So that's the two pieces kind of complement one another. Sometimes it starts as service work and becomes a bigger project down the road. Sometimes it starts as a bigger project and that leads to some service work. So things to consider. Going back to Lori's question of why have a service business if it costs more money? When construction slows, your service business may have an opportunity to grow. From 2008 to 2012, I don't care where you were in this country, we went through a major economic slowdown of construction work. It happened virtually everywhere, maybe not as much everywhere. But I can say when my construction business dropped off 50%, my service business grew 25%. Put that on the top of the list, that Sometimes it kind of evens out the peaks and valleys, because when the construction goes down, you may actually grow your service business. If done properly, your service business will have higher margins. So there's one right out of the gate. I would say it is not unusual for your margins on the service business to be 2 to 3 times what it is on a construction business. I mean, that's not out of whack. That doesn't, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it's not. And so you need to kind of be aware of that. So I can make more money on less work with service than I can with construction. Service can be more predictable, especially if you establish a base of service agreements with customers. So if I've got, as an example, if I'm doing an HVAC business and I've got $500,000 of service agreements, or I've got $100,000 of service agreements that I'm trying to build on, I know that next year I got $100,000 of service agreements. And from that 100,000, maybe I can generate another 100,000 of service work. So I know I got 200,000 starting the year off that I can kind of predict plus or minus 10%. I'm going to do that. With construction, it goes up and down like the economy. It goes up and down, who's busy, who's not busy. So it's a little bit more predictable, especially as you start to grow those service agreements. Final thing is, why have service and construction? If you're doing both, it keeps you from putting all your eggs in one basket. If all I'm doing is construction work and I'm not touching service, and we have an economic slowdown, I'm telling you right now, construction is going to slow down, more than likely. Now, it varies in different parts of the country, but that's what's going to happen. So now I've got some service work, I got some construction work. Now I've got the ability to kind of do a little bit of both. If construction slows down, I've got some service work. Maybe if service slows down, I got some construction work. It really diversifies my business, which, by the way, bankers and insurance, all of these people like that stuff because they don't want to see you doing all your work with one customer. They don't want to see you say, well, all I do is construction and 50% of my business is coming from a single customer. Because guess what? They start to get nervous, because then they think, what happens if you lose that customer? What happens if that customer stops building stuff? What happens to your business? So kind of be aware of that. When we talk about why have service, because it's kind of expensive to put together, it is when you're starting off, but it can become a pretty good chunk of your overall business plan if you do it properly. Did that answer the question, Lori? A long-winded question.
I did have one question. Going back to your second bullet point there, you talked about the higher margins sometimes on service being 3 to 4 times what they are in construction. Can you just go into a little more detail about why that would be?
First off, again, as I talked about earlier, it's more cost involved, but that's cost, not margins. The fact remains is you need to have your service business needs to be a very mobile. It has to have the ability to react very quickly, very reactive business. So
Agile.
Customer calls up at 8 o'clock in the morning. They need you there by 11 o'clock in the morning because they don't have any heat in the building. Or they call it at 8 o'clock in the morning because they have a plumbing problem and they only have a set of bathrooms. They got a plumbing problem. You need to get there like immediately. People will pay more for that because you got to react to it. You got to mobilize really fast. You got to send somebody out there very quickly. So it's not uncommon that, and I hate to throw real numbers out there because it's going to vary from market. You might be bidding a construction job, let's say at 10% overall margin, gross margin, 10%. You might be selling service work at 30% margin. That's just kind of, you're not going to sell. I got to like pull a guy off one job and send him to another job because there's an emergency and give his labor away at 10%. You just don't do it. It's nobody does it. I don't care if you're a copy machine person, a computer technician, an IT person. It's all about being reactive and doing a quality job. And so consequently, the margins tend to be higher and the labor rates tend to be higher for the service business than it is for the construction business. And again, the easy way to understand it is with construction, you're selling bulk hours. And with service, you're selling 8 hours. And that can be a big difference. You know, it's like retail. Somebody says, or manufacturing, I want to buy 1,000 widgets. Well, if you're selling 1,000 widgets, you can sell it at a number versus, well, I only want to buy one widget. Well, it costs me money to do that. Consequently, I can't tie up my resources. I need that flexibility. And so I got to charge more for that. In every industry, I don't care what it is, whether it be the mechanical trades or some other trade or some other business, service is expensive, especially if it's very reactive and you need to send, somebody out to a job site because they've got no water flow or no drain, or it's cold or it's hot. It's as simple as that. I hate to compare this to the airline industry, but I'm going to throw it out there. If I'm buying a ticket today for 6 months down the road to go to some place during the week, and it's not during a holiday, I'm going to pay, let's say, $250 for an airline ticket. On the other hand, if I need to buy a ticket and I need to fly tomorrow, and tomorrow is Christmas, guess what? Airlines charge more because they're mobilizing. It's different. It's supply and demand. Some little differences from that standpoint. You can charge more for service because it's a very reactive business. Does that help, Lori?
Yep, great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Good. We're on to the next learning module.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Hank. That was really, really helpful. A lot of information there. And we look forward to seeing everybody in the next learning module.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you, Hank.